Resourceful Designer, Episode 7, Considerations when Starting a Design Business.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer Podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host, he designed his first website using Adobe PageMill, Mark DeCote.
Welcome back to another episode of Resourceful Designer. I hope your week's been good so far. I've been having a great time. I've been working on a book for my brother, actually. He wrote a book and he sent it to me to format and layout and all that. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a long time since I've actually worked on a book. Now, there's not a lot of design involved, but I did have to format all the sections and the titles and the block quotes and all that. And it was just fun going through the whole thing and working with this is my big brother. I don't get to talk to him very often. So it was kind of nice doing this little job with him. Now, of course, I am doing this as a freebie for him because, as I said, he is my big brother. So it doesn't really pay the bills, but it's a fun job to work on. And it's kind of nice that I get to throw my name in the credits page there as the designer of the book. So that's been something different I've been working on this week. Amongst all the other stuff, I'm designing a poster for a local football club. I just started a website for a local real estate developer, and I'm in the planning stages for our local shopping center. Every year I do their Christmas campaign, and they had some personnel change over there, so we're a little bit behind schedule compared to previous years. But it looks like it'll be a fun time because they're really open-minded this year on what direction the design can take. And I love it when a client leaves a lot of the design decisions up to me. Of course, I do have to get them to sign off on things, but it's always nice when a client comes to you because you are the creative one and they want your input. They don't just come to you and say, this is what we want, you design it. I love dealing with clients like that. So that's kind of what I've been up to this past week. I hope your business is doing well. This will be a fun episode. In case you don't already have your business, if you're one of those people out there that are working at an agency or perhaps you're still in school and you're thinking about one day starting your business, this episode, I'm going to go over a bunch of things to consider. Now, this is not a checklist or a to-do list on starting your business, just things that you have to keep in mind and consider before, during, and after starting up a design business. Now, I just want to let you know that any links or anything I mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 7. And that's with the number 7 and no spaces, just episode 7. Now, before I get into the meat of this episode, I want to share, as always, a resource with you. And this week, it's a trio of resources that I've actually just recently discovered and have quickly grown to love. And therefore, organizing color in your work, whether you're doing web design. Actually, it's mostly for web design, but you can also use it for graphic design. And I've found them very useful. One of them is a quick and easy app. Now, this is a Mac-only app, and it's called ColorSnapper by ColorSnapper.com. And it allows you to go and pick any color that is on your screen. Doesn't matter if it's your background image, a photo, something you have open in an app. It doesn't matter where it is on your screen. It'll go and select any color, and you can copy that color and then paste it into whatever color picker in whatever application, whether you're doing CSS code or in Photoshop or in InDesign or QuarkXPress or whatever you're using. You can paste it in as whatever you want. If you want to paste it in as RGB color, if you want to paste it in as a hex color, as whatever color you want, you just paste it in there. So it copies all the different variations and you get to choose which one. So that's a very quick and easy app on your Mac to allow you to select a color from something. The other one that I've found, which I haven't actually used in a job, but I've been playing around with it and I find it's doing a really good job, is Color Palette Generator by CSS Drive. Now, this is actually an online resource, so it doesn't matter if you're Mac or PC. So what you do is you upload a photo to this website and it will generate a complete color palette based on the images in that photo. Now, it'll usually create, if you want, you can create a light colored palette from the light colors, a medium color palette that kind of spans the medium colors, obviously, and a dark color palette. And it'll also generate a complete color palette to give you an overall feel of what colors would be useful from that photo. And this is great for both web and graphic design. As I mentioned in my intro, I was designing a poster for a local football club, and just for the fun of it, I uploaded one of their photos and it gave me a really interesting color palette. Now, funny enough is the color palette I chose on my own was very similar to the one it generated. But there were some interesting color choices in there that I think worked really well. So check that out. It might be something you'd be interested in, whether you're doing web design or graphic design. And the final resource is Spectrum by Elgin Logic. Now, once again, I'm sorry if this is a Mac-only app. I don't go out looking for these Mac-only apps. It just so happens that when I find these things that I really like, a lot of the time they are Mac-only because I am on a Mac. But Spectrum, I find, is very interesting in creating and managing your color schemes for your various projects. So you could create a color palette in whatever format you want, and then it saves it and you can hold on to it for future reference. So you always know that such and such a client, here's the color palette for that client. And whether you work on their website or a brochure, their stationery, their trade show booth, whatever you're going to work on in the future, you always have that color palette handy, knowing what colors to use for that client. So I'm just starting to use this one, but I thought it was very interesting, enough so that I thought I'd mention it as a resource here in this episode. Now, I'm not affiliated with any of these ones, unlike some other resources I have shared, so I don't get any kickback or anything for mentioning these on the show. I just found them interesting myself, and I thought I'd share them with you. So once again, if you are interested in any of these, I will have the links in the show note to this episode, and you can find that at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 7. Now, you're thinking of starting your own graphic design business. Side note here, if you're already running your own design business, there's no need to stop the podcast. I'm sure there's going to be different things in here that maybe you hadn't thought about, or you might have a different take on them. And I would love for you to hit me up on the comments section on this episode, once again at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 7, and let me know if you think I missed something or if you agree with some of the things I said. But mostly I'm going to take this from the point of view that you're thinking of starting your own design business. And I'm going to divide this up into 3 steps. The things to think about before you actually start your business, the things to think about while you're starting up your business, and a few things to think about once your business is up and running. So let's start with before. Maybe you're working at an agency or you're still in school and you're thinking that I really want to work for myself and run my own business because that's where it's at. That's where my head's going and that's my ultimate goal. Now, as I've mentioned before, if you are a student, I highly, highly encourage you to find some work first. Don't go from school directly into running your own business. You're selling yourself short. You really should get some experience in the real world by working for an agency or working for somebody else. Even if it's in a design department at some company, just the interaction with other employees and having people looking over your shoulder, and that really will help you. The dealing with clients, and especially if you're working at an agency, you get the interaction and the critiques from fellow designers there. And that is invaluable to you. I could honestly say that I would not be the designer I am today if not for the 15 years I spent working at the commercial printer with the dozen or so other designers that passed through over the years while I was there. But just the interaction with them, asking for advice, helping them with their projects, or just completely getting a different thought on an idea. If you have a certain direction you're going with and having another designer come in and say, you know what, why don't you try this? That stuff will all help you in the long run. So if you are in school and you do want to start your own business, I highly recommend you get a couple of years under your belt working for somebody else. But let's say you've done that. And now you're thinking, I've had enough. I want to start my own business. Well, the first thing to think of is, do you want to start a home-based business or do you want to have an office somewhere? And there are pros and cons to both of these. Of course, an office space will require some overhead with all your utilities and your rent. And there's a lot of benefits to that. You can separate your business from your home life. In some situations, it makes you seem more legit because you actually have an office front. And this could work whether you're renting or owning your own office space, or if you're just in one of these co-op or shared office spaces. Now, as you're aware, I run my business out of my home, and that's what I chose, and I love it. I would never do anything other than this. But I have to admit, it's not for everyone. You have to be able to deal with the isolation. I usually work 7-8 hours of the day where I'm just by myself. I've got nobody around me, no distractions, but I've also got nobody to bounce ideas off that's right here. Of course, with the internet and Skype and the various social media networks out there, it's very easy to connect with other people to get that interaction, but it's not the same as having coworkers with you. So you have to deal with that isolation. There's also the discipline involved. There's a lot more discipline involved when working at a home office because there are so many distractions. I'm a huge TV-aholic. I love watching TV. My wife tells me I watch way too much TV. And sometimes it's hard for me knowing that I've got some shows sitting on the DVR that I can't wait to get to, and my TV is less than 20 feet from me. And it would be so easy to just get up, turn it on, and decide, I'll spend an hour and watch a show. And I have to admit, sometimes I do that on some days. Maybe when I get up to have lunch, I'll turn on the TV and I'll watch a show before I sit back down. But you have to have the discipline to not do that on a regular basis when you should be working. Not to mention, because you're at home and there's always stuff to do at home, you have to be able to say, no, I'm in work mode, I'm sitting down and I'm doing work. Now, one of the benefits of working from home is that you do have some flexibility on when you work. Say I'm working at home here and I look out my window and I see that my lawn needs cutting. Now, I know that there's a storm rolling in and this evening it's going to be raining. Well, I can easily just say, well, I'm going to get up, go mow my lawn, spend an hour or so, whatever it'll take, and then I can come back in and I could put in an hour's work this evening because I'm working from home. My office is right here. And even though I tend not to, and that's just a personal preference, I do have the ability to come in and do work at any time of the day I want. So that's one of the things you have to think of beforehand is, do you want a home office with all the pros and cons associated with it? Or do you want a traditional office front with all the pros and cons associated with it? Now, for the purpose of the rest of this podcast, I'm just going to go under the assumption that we're starting a home-based business. Now, most of what I'm going to talk about will apply to both home or office, but I'm just going to set my mind to say we're starting a home-based business. Now, the next thing to think about before actually jumping in or doing anything is what sort of niche you want to concentrate on. Are you a generalist, kind of like what I do, where you'll touch on websites, you'll do stationery, you'll do logo design, t-shirts, trade show display, vehicle wraps, whatever the job is thrown at you, that's what you'll do? Or do you want to niche down and say, I'm a logo designer and that's what I do, or I just do branding, or maybe I only do websites? And that's something you have to decide for yourself. What type of designer are you going to be? You might be able to do everything, but do you really want to do everything? There's some people that specialize only in doing trade show booths, and they make really good living at that. And they're actually in high demand, especially in some big commercial areas. So that's another thing you have to consider before you actually start your business, because it's a lot easier to do it now than after your business is up and running and then decide to drop things. So try to figure out what you want to work on. And there are thousands of niches out there. Logo design, package design. I know a designer that I went to school with, all she does is wedding invitations. And that's a pretty tough business because people don't get married on a regular basis. Now, I like the diversity of working on a multiple of different things. I love being able to work on a website one day and a poster the next day and a vehicle wrap the next day and a t-shirt the following day. I think it keeps my creative juices flowing and things don't get stagnant, always working on the same thing. But that's just me. Now, the other thing to consider when you're starting your business or when you're thinking about your business is what type of business you want to make. And when I say what type of business is, do you want to create an incorporated business? In the US, there's something called an LLC. They don't have that here in Canada. It's not the same thing. Or maybe you just want to be a sole proprietor, or possibly maybe a partnership. If you have somebody, maybe you're a designer and you have somebody that's going to market it and go sale, well, maybe you want to start a partnership with them, or maybe with your significant other, and they can help out in the business some way. So that's one of the things you have to determine up front. Now, it's not critical that you can do that. I decided to set my business up as a sole proprietor, and my accountant told me that at any time, if I ever want to, I can incorporate my business. Now, I've never found a need to do that. I'm happy working as a sole proprietor, but the option is always there. It's a little bit tougher if you do it the other way, if you're incorporated. And of course, incorporation requires a lot more money and there's a lot more involved than just the sole proprietor. But that's something you have to think of before starting your business. Now, another thing, this can be done after, like once you're actually starting the business, but I think it's important right at the get-go, when you decide that I'm going to start my own business, is how are you going to deal with family and friends wanting work from you? Because it will happen. Once you get your business going, you will have family and friends saying, hey, I need a favor from you, or I need something from you. And they're going to expect some sort of deal because they're your family or friends. So right before you start, before you even announce it to people, you should have an idea of what you want to do. Now, maybe you're the type of person that say, they're my family, they're my friends, I'll do whatever for them, free of charge. And that's great. But in some cases, that can really hurt you in the long run. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm doing a book for my brother, and I am doing it free of charge because he is my brother. And I don't do a lot of work for him. It's not like he's constantly asking me for work that's taking up my time that I could be earning money elsewhere. But on the other hand, I have my brother-in-law who runs his own business, and he uses me for all his designs. So I've done his website, I've done all his stationery, I designed his logo, obviously, and all this stuff. Well, I don't do all that for him for free. And this has nothing to do with the fact that one's my brother and the other one's my brother-in-law. It's just the nature of the business. For my brother, it's a one-time project, and I'm happy to help him out. For my brother-in-law, this is reoccurring business, and I can't do that for free. So I do offer a family and friends, I'm quoting here, air quotes, family and friends discount. And I tell them right off the bat, I offer them, and what I do is 30% off my regular rates. And that goes for family, that goes for friends. I have a couple of friends that run their businesses, or for whatever reason they need me to design stuff, and I'll gladly offer them 30% because they are friends. So, friends look out for each other. But I also have to make a living at this, and they realize that, and they're grateful. And you know what? None of them have actually asked me for the discount. I've offered it to them, and they're grateful for it. So that's something you need to decide up front. Are you going to offer a discount for friends and family? What do you determine a friend? I only have certain friends that I offer discounts to. There are people I went to school with or people I associate that I don't consider them close enough friends to offer them a discount. And there's always a way around it. When somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can you give me a good deal on this? You can always come back to them and say, yeah, I'll help you out somehow, and then give them your regular rate. They won't know the difference, and they're grateful because even if they did get quotes elsewhere and they come back, they know my worth. They know what I'm capable of doing. And maybe it's possible that I did underbid some other designer, and they think that I'm giving them a good deal. And if by chance my price is higher, a lot of times they'll think it's just because my rates are higher because I must be a better designer. So anyways, that's something you have to think of way before you actually launch your business. Because as soon as you announce that you are starting your own design business, people will start coming out of the woodwork asking you for deals and discounts. It's bound to happen. Now, another thing to think of before starting your business is your initial cash investment. And this is very important. How much money are you going into the business with? Do you have enough money to sustain yourself while you're growing the business and attracting clients? Now, this will differ on whether you're starting this as a part-time business, kind of like what I did, where I was working at the printing company and I started my business part-time doing websites on the side before I finally left the printing company and then expanded my web design business into a full-fledged graphic business. So because of that, I didn't need as large an initial cash investment as if I would have just quit or been laid off and had to start from scratch. But that's something to think of beforehand is, do you have some sort of savings made in case you fall on hard times and it takes you a while to get things built up where you won't have the money to sustain your lifestyle? So that's another big consideration. And finally, before you actually start setting everything up, a big thing here is just trying to figure out what you're going to call yourself. Are you going to design under your own name, or do you want to create a brand for yourself? And there are pros and cons to both. There are lots of designers that work under their own name, and there are lots of designers that create their own company. I decided to go the second route. And I can honestly say that coming up with the name for my design company was one of the hardest things I've had to do. For years, when I considered it, I was always thinking of calling my company Ryjo Designs. And that's because my son is named Ryan and my daughter is named Joelle. So I thought combining the two and calling it Ryjo Designs. And for years, I'd been doodling different logos and stuff like that as I was thinking of maybe one day starting my business. But as the day came closer, I did realize that even though I liked the name, there was no significance to it. Unless somebody knew my two kids, the name Ryjo didn't mean anything to them. It's not a proper word. Yes, it might stand out and it might be memorable in some ways, But I just realized that the business was me. It had nothing to do with my kids. And as it came closer and closer to it, I decided that that wasn't the way to go. Now, what I did settle on is the name Marksman Design, which was a little play on words since my name is Mark, and I loved archery. It's not something I ever got into competitive or anything like that, but I always loved archery to the point that I loved Robin Hood movies or anything like that. And when I used to be really big into playing Dungeons and Dragons, my character was always some sort of archer. I just loved the bow and arrow. So one of the names that I came up with when I had jotted down probably hundreds of different possibilities, one that popped into my mind and just stayed there was Marksman. Now, I made sure when I designed my branding for my company that I did incorporate the bow and arrow so that it wouldn't be associated with guns or firearms. So I have a little archer in my logo. And people think it's cute because Marksman and my name's Mark, it ties that way. So that's something that you really should consider before you take any other step is what are you going to call your business? And I can do an entire podcast episode just on the name of your business. I mean, if you're running under your own name, there's all sorts of things that you don't have to do, registration, and it becomes a lot easier for taxes and everything if you're going under your own name. But then creating a brand also allows for expansion in the future if you ever want to, and the possibility of actually selling your business if it ever comes to that. So those are the things to consider before you actually start the process of starting your business. Now, there are many, many more, but I'm going to stop there. So now I'm going to go into what to do when it's time to say, I'm starting my business. Now, I'm going to give these in no particular order. So first off, your computer. Obviously, if you're doing designing, whether it's graphic work or, well, of course, web design, you need a computer. And you have to decide whether you're going to use a Mac, a PC, and what computer. Now, obviously, your background will play a lot into this, and possibly you already have the computer, and this is not a worry, and you can skip ahead. But it is a big thing to consider. Now, a lot of times you want to go for the biggest and the best computer, but that's not always needed. If you just do a lot of page layout and stuff like that, you don't need a very RAM-heavy computer. Now, if you're doing a lot of video editing and stuff like that, then maybe that would be an idea. But if you are looking for a computer, a lot of times you can save money by getting the second or third tier model and not necessarily the top of the line computer. Or consider getting a refurbished computer. In fact, most of the devices that I buy from Apple, I buy through their refurbished store. 2 of my previous iMacs were bought that way, and I saved a few $100s that way, and they were the top of the line model at the time. But because I bought them refurbished directly from apple.com, I saved a couple of $100s. But as I said, you don't necessarily need the top of the line computer. The iMac that I'm running right now is a mid-2010 model. We're right now in October 2015. So this computer is over 5 years old, and it still does everything I need it to do. Would I like to have a newer model? Sure, it would be faster and it would be a little bit better, but there's nothing wrong with this one, and there's no reason why I can't be a excellent graphic designer or web designer using a 5-year-old computer. So that's one of the things you need to consider. Now, another thing that you need to consider when you're setting up your business, and remember I'm saying this is a home-based business, is what address are you going to use? Now, this might seem like a no-brainer. You're working from home, you use your home address. But you know what? When I set up my business from home, I didn't want all my clients knowing where I lived. First of all, I don't live in town. I service the city of Cornwall, Ontario, but I live in a rural area just outside the city. And I didn't necessarily want all my clients knowing where I lived. So I got myself a mailbox at my local UPS store. Now, maybe you have something similar at some sort of a UPS store or maybe mailboxes, etc., or wherever you are, there might be some sort of mailbox. Maybe it's just your local post office. Well, when I set up my business, I got myself a mailbox there. And the benefit is that my clients don't know where I live unless I share it with them. And having a mailbox like this also seems to create a persona for my business that's a lot more sophisticated than what I actually am. Now, not all places are the same, but at the UPS store, when you set up a mailbox, they don't call it a box number or a PO box. It's actually a suite. So in my case, I have the address of the UPS store and I'm suite 338. And that sounds a lot more impressive than PO box something because they automatically think you're a big legitimate business because you have a suite somewhere. Now, the other benefit is that any packages sent through suppliers or through clients or anything, I can have shipped directly to the UPS store and they hold them for me. So I don't have to worry about being home to accept a delivery. There's always somebody at the store to accept and sign for me, which has been a big benefit for me over the years. Plus, it makes it a lot easier for my clients. If a client has a check and they say, "Oh, Mark, I have a check to drop off for you," I can just tell them, go by the UPS store and hand it to one of the ladies there. Tell them to put it in box 338. And that way my client doesn't have to drive all the way out to my place to hand me the check. So yes, it is an added expense, but I think it's something you should really look into. Because who knows down the road where you might do something and a client won't like something, and the last thing you need is for them to know where you live. I'm not saying that you're going to rob them or do something unethical, but if you've got a family to worry about, it's just something to consider. Now, the other thing is when you're working from home is meeting places. If you need to meet face-to-face, now I always make it a point of having face-to-face meetings at my client's place of work. But in some cases, that doesn't work out. And in those situations, I will gladly meet with them at a coffee shop or find someplace locally in town or wherever where we can meet and discuss things. Now, there are a couple of clients, and I say only a couple of clients that I will meet at my home here. But these are clients that I've dealt with for a long time, and I trust them, and I will invite them into my home. Now, one of the reasons I usually go out to meeting places, of course, my wife doesn't want all these strangers walking through the house, especially if it happens to be a time of the week where the house might not be all spick and span and, it's the day before we vacuum the house, or maybe some dirty dishes were left on the counter. Well, she doesn't want people walking through and seeing all this stuff. So it's a lot easier to just find a common meeting place, whether it's a coffee shop or a restaurant, or on a nice summer day, just meeting in a park somewhere. So your address and meeting places is something to consider when setting up your business. Now, another important thing is your business hours. As I mentioned earlier, if you're working from home, there's really nothing stopping you from working all hours of the day. But with that said, you should set standard hours and let your clients know what those hours are. My business hours are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I can work anytime I want, but those are the only hours I deal with clients. If a client calls me after 5 p.m., it goes to voicemail. I won't pick it up, nor will I reply to an email after 5 p.m. or before 9 a.m. Because the last thing you want to do is send an email to a client with a proof at 8 o'clock at night, and the client knows, oh, they work late, then I can contact them or I can expect this from them. Next thing you know, they're sending you a rushed job and they'll say, well, I need this first thing in the morning. And you say, well, it's 4 o'clock right now. And they say, yeah, but I know you work in the evening, so you can do this tonight. So your hours is really something to consider. And I think you should set your hours, let your clients know that these are your working hours just because you're at home and not at an office. If you were working at an office space somewhere, your clients would fully understand that at 5 o'clock, your lights go out, the doors get locked, and that's it. They have to wait till the following day to talk to you. But for some reason, when your clients find out that you're working from home, all of a sudden it opens it up to them to contact you at all hours of the day. And trust me, it happens. I'll get phone calls at 10 o'clock at night coming in from a client. And sometimes they know that I'm not going to pick up. They just want to leave a voicemail, but it is still annoying. Now, the other thing to consider when starting up your business is your rates. How much will you charge and how will you charge? Will you be charging an hourly rate or are you going to price jobs on a per job basis? I personally do a mixture of both. Depending on the job, I'll either do it at an hourly rate and then I tell my client, I'll just bill you for whatever time I spend on the job. Or on some jobs, like especially web design projects, I'll set out a price up front and I'll tell them, as long as the scope of the job doesn't change, this is the price you'll pay for the website. Should things change along the lines, then we'll look at the price again. And when setting your rates, don't sell yourself short. If you worked at an agency where you were being paid an hourly wage for working for them, don't think that that's the rate you deserve working on your own. You deserve much more than that. When I left the printing company that I was working for, I actually set my rate to be the exact same rate they were charging their clients, which was more than double, almost triple what my actual salary was at the printing company. And you got to remember, you got to set your rates high enough to pay for your bills. If you put in a 40-hour week, you're not getting paid 40 hours worth of work. Only a part of that will actually be billable hours. So you have to make sure that your rates cover everything within those billable hours. Now, if you remember last week, I talked about that. And I said how when I left the design shop, I figured out that I only needed to work about 12 hours a week, billable, at my new rates to make what my take-home salary was at the print shop after government deductions and everything. And in all honesty, I was selling myself short. When I was working at the print shop, I was doing a certain type of design. And when I started on my own, my designs became much more sophisticated and better. Because for one thing, when people were using me at the print shop, they were coming there because they wanted stuff printed. It was convenient that there was a design department there and that they can use the design. There was a few clients that came specifically for the design department, but mostly it was they were having stuff printed. When I started on my own, people were coming to me because they wanted something designed. And I was selling myself short by charging the same rate that the print shop was. And it didn't take me long. Within 2 years, I almost doubled my rate. And in that time, I didn't lose a single client. Actually, most of my clients, when I raised my rates, a few of my clients said, well, it's about time. They said, we weren't going to say anything, but you were charging way too little for the services you offer. So keep that in mind when setting your rates. Now, another thing to consider when you're setting up your business is how you're going to communicate with clients. I mean, phone and email is fine, but is there any other system that you're going to use? These days with social media, there's so many things out there. Are you going to use Twitter? Are you going to use Facebook to communicate with your clients? Are you going to use a program like Slack or anything else like that? And there's so many that come and go. Is Skype going to be a way you're going to communicate with them? FaceTime? That's just something to consider up front, but I won't dive into that one too much. Another thing to consider right off the bat, which is best, is payment methods. How are you going to receive payments from your clients? Traditionally, it was always been check. But nowadays, there's electronic transfer, there's PayPal. Will you accept PayPal? Knowing that you have to pay a small fee to PayPal for that transaction. Will you accept credit cards? A lot of clients ask for credit cards, especially if they can earn points by their credit cards. I myself don't accept credit cards because I don't want to have to pay the monthly banking fees for a credit card transaction machine, which I don't use that often. But I'll often tell them, if you want to use your credit card, you can pay me via PayPal. And I'll take that little percentage loss from PayPal charging me for the transaction. Now, speaking of communication with clients, I want to talk to you about your phone. What are you going to do about your phone for your business? You're working from home. You do not, and I stress, you do not want to use your home phone as your business phone. For one thing, I mentioned earlier about your hours. If you set your hours and say, I don't work after 5 o'clock, or you don't deal with clients after 5 o'clock, if you use your home phone for your business, how will you know? Call display is great, but sometimes call display doesn't display something, or maybe it's a brand new client calling you out of the blue at 8 o'clock at night and you see a call display name you don't recognize. Then you have to decide, do I pick it up or do I not? So right off the bat, if you're working from home, I would say don't use your home phone. Now, a lot of people say, well, just use your cellular, but that comes to the same thing. Unless you have a separate business cellular to your home cellular, the same thing can happen. If you get a call at 9 o'clock at night on your cellular, and a lot of cellular carriers don't offer their call display, I find, isn't as good as the traditional home phones. So a lot of times the phone call coming in, you don't know who it's from. So do you pick up a phone call at 9 o'clock at night if you don't know who the caller is? Could be an emergency from a family member, or it could be a client trying to reach you, and you really want to talk to them at that time. So if you are setting up your own home-based business, I highly recommend you either get a second phone line specifically for your business, or if your service, inquire with your phone company if they do something. What I have done is I use a service, and my phone company calls it Identicall. And what this does is it actually sets up a second phone number on my existing phone line. And this second phone number rings differently in my house. So I don't have a second phone line. I just have a second phone number. And when somebody calls my home line, the phone rings with traditional ring, ring, ring. But if somebody calls the business line, the phone will ring by going ring, ring, then a space, ring, 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 ring. And that way, it's very easy to differentiate. And I don't have to worry about just the phone sitting in my office. It rings through the entire house. So if the phone rings with a double ring like that tells me it's the business line, for one thing, I don't have to worry about my kids picking up. And if you have kids, if you're working from home and you do have a family, That's something, kids love answering the phone. Well, at an early age, I taught my kids that if the phone is ringing with a double ring, you don't touch it. So that is a great method. Plus, after 5 o'clock, we listen to the ring. If it's a double ring, I just let it go to voicemail. And with the Identicall, we have 2 voicemail boxes. Now, unfortunately, they are connected. So if somebody calls the house line or if somebody calls the business line, it goes through the same system. And there's one message that says, you have reached the Decote family and Marksman Design. If you would like to leave a message for the Decote's family, press 1. If you'd like to leave a message for Marksman Design, press 2. And then it's up to the person to press 1 or 2 and leave a message in whichever voicemail box. But the other benefit to that is each mailbox has its own code. So I have a code for Marksman Design. And when you call, there's no way for my kids to accidentally listen to a message or delete a message. For the family one, the kids can always check a message to see something and they punch in the family code and they can listen to what a message is. And sometimes it'll happen that, because as you know, when you check a message, it no longer registers as a new message. And there's been times where somebody's called and left me a message, but my son has listened to the messages and forgot to tell me. And I would just not know that this person had called unless I go and check messages myself because the little light wasn't flashing anymore to tell me there was a new message. But by having these mailboxes separately, there's no way for my kids to check it. So that little light flashes and tells me that there's a new message. So that is something I highly, highly recommend when you're starting a business, is to set up your phone in a certain way so that you know when it's a client calling or you know when it's work related. And whether you're getting a second phone line and you have a special phone in your office, or as I said, inquire with your phone company. Now, not all phone companies have the service like mine, this Identicall, but if you can, and it's really cheap, it costs me $5 a month. That's all it is, and I get a second phone number. Now, the one drawback I will say with Identicall is the second phone number is not listed in the phone directory. So I'm talking about the physical paper phone book that a lot of places have done away with already, but we still get one delivered around here. My business is not listed in the physical phone book because the Identicall is not considered my main number. My home number is listed in the phone book. So your phone is something to consider. Now, the next thing to consider as you're starting your business is your suppliers and your resources. Now, resources, I'm talking about stuff like your banks, your lawyer, your accountants. These are all things you should set up beforehand, whether you need them or not. Your accountant, as you're starting out a business, I highly recommend you meet with an accountant, either somebody you know or somebody new, and just go over everything to make sure you're doing everything right. A lawyer, if you're not incorporating, technically you don't really need a lawyer up front, but it might be a good idea to just make contact with a lawyer and just get that open discussion going so that if you ever do need a lawyer down the line, you're not calling somebody out of the blue and trying to explain who you are. Not to mention, if you're going to be working with a contract, and please tell me you are working with a contract or plan on working with a contract, you really want to get a lawyer involved just to go over it. Sometimes you can find great contracts online for design and you could customize them for yourself. But it's worth spending a couple of bucks and have your lawyer go over it just to make sure everything is good and legal and that you're covered in the way you think your contract is covered. And as I mentioned, bank, you definitely want to set up a separate banking account for your business. You do not want to run your business through your personal banking account. It's very easy that way to lose track of things. Set up a separate business account. Go in and talk. There is a business specialist at your local bank. Go in and talk to them about your banking needs, and they are there to help you. They know the ins and outs of small business. Go set up a meeting with them and get a separate bank account, whether you want to get just one bank account or if you want to get a savings and a checkings account or whatever. Set up something completely separate for your business. Now, of course, there's all sorts of stuff like your business plan and your marketing plan, but I'm not going to go into that. That's just general. Anytime you're starting any business, you should have a business plan, you should have a marketing plan, you should have a sales plan and all that stuff. So that's just stuff to keep in mind. But another thing is finding suppliers. If you are a graphic designer and you are going to be doing print design, you want to get in with some printers. You want to get to know them and get them to know you because you are going to be sending files to them and every printer is a little different. So you should be contacting them and letting them know who you are if they don't already know you and finding out if there's special needs they have, if they need files in a certain way. I deal with one local printer that If I don't send crop marks on a job, they won't print it. And yet I have another printer who doesn't want me to put crop marks on the job. They want me to include the bleed, but they tell me don't put crop marks on because their system will automatically put their own crop marks on the job according to the page size. So 2 different local printers, and I have to send the files in 2 different ways. So get to know them. If you're a web designer and you are going to be doing or organizing any hosting for your companies, you got to find your hosting, whether you use HostGator, which is who I use for my stuff at resourcefuldesigner.com/hosting, which is a great place to host your stuff. If you're going to be registering domains for your clients and that, you have to find a place. So these are all things you should be finding up front. You don't want to have to start searching for all this stuff after a client asks you to do something. And another thing, final thing I'm going to talk about as you're setting up your business, and this could be as you're setting up, or it might be after you've already set it up, but I'm going to talk about it here. And that's pro bono work and dealing with nonprofits. You have to set yourself up right off the get-go on how you're going to deal with people asking for pro bono work and how you're going to deal with nonprofits. Now, keep in mind, nonprofit does not mean no budget. In fact, many national nonprofits have bigger marketing budgets and design budgets than a lot of other companies. So just because somebody's a nonprofit organization doesn't mean you should be offering them a discount or doing work for free or whatever. Talk to them, find out what their budget is on whatever project. Because a lot of them are going to try to get a deal out of you when really they have the money to pay you. I've learned that over the years. Now, when it comes to pro bono work, you're going to get a lot of people coming and asking you, can you do this for us? And we'll let you put your name on it, or we'll add you as a sponsor. And what you should do is right off the bat, set yourself up some criteria. What sort of companies will you work with, and set a limit. My mother passed away of diabetes 3 years ago. So I support the Canadian Diabetes Association. Now, I don't do any work for them, but if somebody else calls and says, we're from the Alzheimer's Society, or we're from the Heart Institute or whatever, can you do some pro bono work? I tell them right off the bat, no, all my charity and all my donations go to the Diabetes Association. I'll be happy to do work for you, but I won't do it for free. Now, I know it's hard when you're starting off to refuse some of this work, especially if they promise you to get your name out there. But in all honesty, having your name as a sponsor on somebody's poster or for their event doesn't get you a whole lot of exposure, not as much as you would think it would. So you really have to judge whether your time is worth it. I also set a limit that if in a calendar year, I will do pro bono work for only 2 separate organizations. And every year I kind of get a blank slate. When somebody calls me up, if they call me up in January or February and ask me if I'll do work, if it falls within my criteria, I will agree and do some pro bono work for them. But then I'm only going to do work for one other throughout the year. My time is valuable, and yes, I love helping these places out, but if I was to do work for every place that called and asked me to do something just so I can have my logo on it, or that they'll send me future work, which usually doesn't pan out, if I was to agree to every time somebody called for that, I would spend half my time doing free work. So you got to set your limits. And people understand when you say, sorry, I've already reached my limit this year for pro bono work, but I would love to work with you. And never close the door. Tell them that you would love to work with them, but you can't do it for free. Or let them know that every year you change and hit me up next year. I may be able to do it next year, but this year my quota for pro bono work has already been filled. And as I said, that's something I would decide on that as you're starting up, because believe me, you will be hit up from the get-go. People are, once they find out you're in business, especially when they find out you're a new business, they figure, oh, this person wants exposure. Maybe they'll do some work for free in order to get that exposure. So that's something to think up front. So those are some of the things to consider as you're setting up your business. Now, I'm going to quickly go over the stuff after you've set up your business. Once you've got your business up and running, you've got your name, you've got your branding, you've got your office set up, and you're starting to do work for clients. So what are the things to consider at this point? Your marketing. You got to continue marketing yourself. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean buying ads and paying for stuff. As I mentioned before, I've never bought an ad for my company. But marketing does include getting the word out, talking to people, handing out business cards, whatever it takes, whether it's word of mouth or through paper or through web or whatever, getting your name out there, your business out there so that people know. The other thing to do is join clubs, join groups, especially those centered around your industry. If there's a local chamber of commerce, I highly recommend you become a member of your chamber of commerce. That helped me out so much. Not to mention, as a designer, my chamber of commerce themselves, they always want to deal with people who are members. So I was one of few graphic designers to join. All of a sudden, I had all the graphic design work for the Chamber of Commerce, which was great. I was doing stuff for their website, their print, all their different events that they were doing, and they were giving me work on a regular basis. Not to mention, when somebody contacts the Chamber of Commerce, and a lot of companies, when they'll come to town, they'll move, one of the things they'll do is they'll contact the local Chamber of Commerce and say, who can I work with? Who I need a designer. Who's a good designer to work with? And your chamber will obviously, they will only recommend people that are part of the chamber. And there's a lot of other chamber members, a lot of other businesses who, through some sort of loyalty, will do the same. They'll look first to see who is a fellow chamber member that I can work with before looking elsewhere. So I highly recommend you join your Chamber of Commerce and join any other groups or clubs. Like there's a local art society. Now, it's mostly for fine artists and photographers, but they do consider graphic design as an art. So I joined that society. I don't do much with them, but my name is put out there anytime they put a newsletter or it's on their website as a member. And I have had a few jobs come through that. So any sort of groups and organizations that you could become a part of to get your name out, join them. Now, partnerships. One thing that I highly recommend you do is don't look at your fellow graphic designers in your area as competition. Look at them as fellow resources. I know every single graphic designer in my area. And whenever a new one pops up I don't know, I make it a point of calling them up. I don't email them. I call them up and introduce myself. Because you never know. And it's happened in the past where I've gotten so busy that I've had a small job that I wasn't able to get to, that I've contacted another designer in my network, another local designer, and I says, hey, can you handle this job for me? This client wants something. It's really simple. I can't do it. Do you have time to do it? And I'll pass this job on to them. And you know what? It's happened to me in return. I have another local designer that they take a 3-week vacation every year. And during that time, they actually forward their business phone to my phone. And they tell their clients that if you need something while I'm away, contact this person. Now, you have to be good with them and not try to steal their clients. So whenever I've done work for somebody, now obviously I can't do something if it's this other designer did a job and I need a correction done or a change. I don't have this designer's files, but I can sometimes help somebody, like if they're having a problem with their website and they need me to walk them through something, I can do that. Or sometimes they'll need a new job done and I can take that on easily. The thing to watch out for is you don't want to step on toes and have this client say, well, I like dealing with you better. I don't want to deal with the other designer. When that sort of thing happens, you got to kind of say, listen, if you're going to do that, discuss this with this other client. If they're okay with it, then so be it. But if it's going to ruffle feathers, then I would prefer you just keep dealing with them. I was just doing this as a friendly gesture to them. So reach out to your fellow designers. They are competition, but if you don't view them that way, if you view them as resources, they can be a big help. Not to mention, sometimes you can set up great partnerships where if you're a graphic designer and you're not that strong in web, or if you're a web designer and you're not that strong in print, sometimes you can set a partnership where if you get a client to do something and they need a business card or a flyer and that's not your forte, you can reach out to another designer and say, I'll farm this job out to you. And the client doesn't need to know the difference. They do everything through you, but you get this other designer to do the job. And then you in turn just pass the cost on to the client. You can mark it up if you want or not. It's up to you. But you set up this partnership with people. And I've got a lot of designers that I do that sort of thing with. The other thing you want to do is if you are in print design, reach out to your local printers and find out if they will offer you a discount. There are 4 local printers in my area. 3 of them offer me a discount if I bring work to them, because unlike a regular client of theirs who might use their services once a year, they know that as a graphic designer, I have lots of clients that I could potentially bring to them. So they offer me a discount. Now, what the great thing about this is I can then turn, if the printer gives me a quote on a job, I could then turn around and show that quote to my client and saying, here's the price. I don't have to mark up that price because I actually make my money off the discount, off the amount that the printer will actually charge me for the job. So my client doesn't have to say, well, I'm going to get my own price for the printer, because if they do, the price will be identical to what I'm charging them. So I'm not upping the price. I'm not marking up what the printer would be charging. Instead, I get my money by getting a discount from the printer. And as I said, 3 of the 4 local printers have offered me a discount. Now, I'll give you a wild guess. Which of the local printers do I use most often? Well, I could tell you that 4th one, I don't send them a whole lot of work unless my client absolutely insists that I send work to them. Most people will ask for 3 separate quotes. And if they want the job done locally, I have 3 printers I can get quotes from. And it doesn't matter which one they go to, I get a small fee from the printing job. So contact your local printers and find out if they do offer something like that if you do bring them work on a regular basis. Now, 2 more things before I wrap this up. One of them is once you get your business up and running, don't think that that's it. You're set, you're gold, everything's going well. You've got to continue your education. We are in an industry that is constantly changing. It is up to you when you're on your own. When you're working at an agency, sometimes the agency will take care of that and say, we've got to learn this, and they'll send you on a course, or they'll make you take a webinar and stuff like that. And the agency is dictating it. When you're on your own, it's completely up to you on what you're going to learn, when you're going to learn it. And you do have to learn things. When it comes to web design, there's always new innovations coming out, and you have to keep on top of these things. If you don't, you will fall behind, your designs will stagnate, and you will start losing clients because you're not up with the times. So remember to save time, save money specifically for that continued education, whether it's webinars, whether it's going to conferences or training courses or whatever the case may be. And the last thing I want you to remember is exercise. When you're at an agency working with all these people around you, you're kind of subconsciously reminded to get up, to talk, to socialize, to walk about. Trust me, when you're sitting in your office at home and there's nobody else there, it's very easy for an 8-hour day to go by and you realize that you never got up off your chair. And that can have a lot of health and physical effects on you. So do something, set up an exercise routine, even if it's you set up a timer just to get up and walk around once per hour. If you've got one of the new Apple Watches, you can set that up, or you can set up a reminder on your phone to just tell you that once an hour or once every 2 hours, get up and walk around for 5 minutes. If your eyes are constantly glued to the screen and you need to turn around and look out your window from time to time. It's one of those things that you don't really think of, but trust me, when you're working isolated and there's nobody else around you and it's just you and your computer, you can completely lose track of time, and that's not good. I can't tell you how many times my wife has arrived home after work, and only then do I realize that I never even had lunch and it's already supper time. I was just so in the zone going that I would get up and I would feel stiff because I hadn't gotten up off my chair in 6 or 7 hours. I hadn't eaten or I hadn't drinking anything, and that's not good for health-wise. Yes, I was very productive and I got a lot of work done, but if you're not healthy, if you're sick, then obviously that'll affect your business as well. So that's about it. Those are some of the things I wanted you to consider if you're starting your design business. Now, as I said, if you've already got your design business up and running, some of this you've probably, hopefully, already taken care of, but maybe I peeked some ideas in there on stuff that you might have forgotten about, or just gave you a different point of view on something. And I would love to know your thoughts. So once again, if you want to leave me a comment, just head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/episode7 and leave me a comment there and let me know what you thought. Did I miss anything? Do you think I was wrong with something? Let me know. You can also, if you want to reach me, you could send me an email at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com or use my feedback form on the page at resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback. You can hit me up on Twitter. I would love for you to follow me on Twitter at resourcefulD and like my Facebook page at facebook.com/resourcefuldesigner. Now, if you do have your business up and running, maybe it's been a while or maybe you're just new setting up, you could take advantage of my free guide, the 4-week marketing boost at marketingboost.net. That'll help spiffy up your online and offline presence in order to create the best first impression for when a new client first discovers you. So check that out at marketingboost.net. Now, in next week's episode of Resourceful Designer, I'm going to be talking about something called just-in-time learning. And it's something that really changed. I figured this out, or I heard about this a couple of years ago, and it really changed the way I was looking at my continued education in my business. And I want to just touch with you some of the things, how it helped me and how it can help you in your business. So that'll be on the next episode of Resourceful Designer. Now, don't forget to check out the color resources I mentioned at the beginning. There's ColorSnapper, Color Palette Generator, and Spectrum. 3 great tools for organizing and managing your color palettes and color swatches for your various clients and generating color palettes. So check those out and let me know what you think. If you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, or if you're enjoying the podcast in general, I would love for you to leave a review in iTunes. You can head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, and that'll redirect you to the page where you can leave your review. But that's it for this week of Resourceful Designer. I'm Mark Decote, wishing you all the best in your design business. And until next time, I want to remind you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.